Welcome back to the Art for Human Rights podcast. What is the price of resistance? How difficult is it to live with and in your convictions when going home is not an option, when maintaining your connections, your friends, your family, and contact with them is something you can't do anymore for their safety and for yours? Today, we speak with Chinese political cartoonist, artist, and human rights defender Badiucao and his amazing and very, very inspiring story of what it means to do what you need to do, to have the voice you need to have, and to make art when sometimes the most severe price is what you might end up paying. This is the Art for Human Rights podcast, and here is Badiucao and the price of resistance. Here it comes. Well, thank you very much for being on the Art for Human Rights podcast, Badiucao. It's super, super nice to have you with us and appreciate that you're making the time. In what seems to be a pretty busy schedule, you winning awards and being a man about town over the last couple of weeks, right?
Well, it's a great pleasure to be on the program. Yes, this month is a pretty rewarding season for me. So finally, I'm recognized by the journalism world in Australia with a reward which is called the Walkley. So that is quite an honor for the excellence of journalism in Australia, which is also something very rare that happened to me, other than being prized as some kind of dissident artist. But this time, this reward is for professionalism. It's for my art skills. So that's something that I really appreciate.
So to kind of give you a formal introduction to our audiences who may or may not know that much about you, you're originally from China, you're a political cartoonist, you're an artist, and you're a human rights defender. And so your work has seen you published in a number of different platforms: Amnesty International, Freedom House, BBC, CNN, loads of different online publications. You've also got a thriving social media channel and on Instagram and so on. But really, your work is very much focused on, I'd say, the disagreement that you have and some strong opinions that you have on the Chinese government in particular, and some of the areas that you feel they have overstepped the mark in terms of human rights abuses or human rights challenges. So we're going to get into that, and I can't wait to unpack that so that, your views, like I said earlier, your views are something that can stand apart and stand on their own, aside from the amazing art that you produce as well. But maybe we can start kind of at the beginning, just to understand some of your formative years. You're still quite young, like I am. Yeah, and so,
thank you.
Clearly, well, I'd love to hear about kind of your, where you were born, the fact, what your parents did, and what were some of the initial things that formed and shaped who you are today.
Right. I always say that to be an artist means to be very truthful to your life. I also believe that I just want to be an artist, and all the dissident or human rights defender title are merely the byproduct of being an artist. So I do believe that everyone's personal life, family, culture, all those backgrounds played a very important role in creating or shifting any artist's path. I am born in China, and I'm born in a family who were like artists since the very early time in China. Actually, my grandpa and his brother were the first group of filmmakers back in China in the 1920s. And they become very active and successful in the movie industry until the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, is in power. And then both of them got persecuted because the art, because the film that they produced, that they make. So my grandpa was sentenced to a forced labor camp in the rural China, and eventually tragically died there. And then his brother took his life by himself because of persecution and all the pressure from the political stone in 1957. People might know it as 100 Blossom Movement, which is a campaign that designed to basically purge all the intellectuals, artists, and creative people who might pose a threat to the regime. So my family is very much loomed by this terrible history that my dad became an orphan, actually, when he's around 7 or 8. And when I am born in my family, actually, none of my parents wanted me to be an artist because of this family history. They don't believe that being an artist will be safe enough to be China. They believe that anything about the culture or ideology or expressed differently would causing huge trouble for any individual. So obviously, as you can imagine, my parents would tell me those family stories all the time, not for making me an artist, but for warning me not to be an artist. But I don't think, like many parents who do not really know the essence of education, when you tell a teenager don't be something, they tend to be something. And that's the same lesson, passed to me. So for me, when I heard that story, yes, I know it could be dangerous, but I also know that, well, there might be some potential and talent in me, but not just because my parents don't want me to do, then I shall giving it up. So the seed of being an artist or making art was embedded very young. Even though when I grew up in China, I was not encouraged to be an artist, I actually went to law school in Shanghai and was on the path to be a lawyer, as all, kind of stereotyped Asian parents want. We want to make good money to be engineer, doctor, lawyer. These are the three choices and the freedom that they all have. So I was set on a very, very different path when I grew up in China. But eventually, I just realized this is not really something I want, which is leading to my later choice to be different.
Wow. So there was like all kind of struggles in a way, there's the internal struggle that precedes the bigger one, right? And so you had to kind of break the mold of what you saw happen to your parents and the best that they wanted for you. But ultimately, it ended up being, in a way, a similar path where you had strong opinions, strong convictions, and you decided to follow that, which is a brave choice, whether or not you might live in a place like China, but pretty awesome. So what happened then? You left law school. You didn't go to art school. You don't have any kind of formal art school kind of training. Where did the passion for the creative sort of start? At what point? Had you always been drawing? Was this something you picked up later on?
Well, I've been a kid that loved doodling when I'm very young, like a lot of kids who are strongly influenced by manga and animation culture. That, when I grow up, I like those cartoonish stuff. I like animation and manga characters. But obviously, without family support, I didn't really go on any professional training. It is always kept just as a hobby. So when I decided that, I don't want this kind of mediocre life, pursuing an expensive apartment in Shanghai and then just become everybody else, I have to make a choice or make a change. But this change cannot come easily, which means that the first step is not being an artist, but find a soil that have enough safety and freedom for anybody to have the opportunity to fulfill the potential to be an artist. So for the first 4 years, when I left China and landed in Australia, I was on a different path again. I studied as an educator. I worked in primary school for 2 years until I get the green card in Australia. Then that is the moment I truly feel, okay, now I can have this life that with possibility, right? My trajectory is no longer fixed with certain social circumstance, but this society would providing a relatively easier mode for life so that I can try different things and fail without worrying that there will be the end of my life. And that's when I started making art. And of course, because, I was born in this family, born in this political loaded history and current atmosphere. So naturally, I want to engage my experience with my, art expression. So I started to doodling about politics or current affair about China, then posted it online as a hobby. In the same time, working as a teacher. By the time, I'm still not sure what I want to be, because what I really want is just try different things. I would say till today, it is still a surprise. Sometimes I feel that I would actually become an artist as myself now.
When did you feel that your art, was there a moment when your art or something you drew, maybe it was a particular cartoon or a particular doodle even, where you felt that, or you've got the sign that, okay, this is something that I can do. This is something that has value. I have a voice here. Was there a moment that you can kind of trace it back to?
I mean, there is self-recognition and there's public recognition. For self-recognition, that I always have confidence in my drawing and my art. Even when I was very young, drawing those manga characters from Japan. So I don't really doubt that I could potentially have this career. But what really helped is public recognition. When I started posting my works online, that receiving people's, sharing and likes and seeing that my voice actually values something and potentially it could helping people to feel empowered in a very powerless society. Particularly when I started to making portraits for certain dissidents from China, for people who are suffer from the regime and could not find a voice. When I started doing works for them and receiving a message from them saying, we appreciate your art, we feel our story being heard. And that's when the sense of mission comes out. That's when I see the value more than just satisfying a artistic hobby, but there is something more into it. There's something more than just personal satisfying.
Yeah, it's something that has social value for others, right? And
right.
Beyond just the art itself. Now, when we look at your art, you have a really cool, interesting sort of eclectic style, and it doesn't feel like it's a style that is one style. It's kind of a pastiche of different sort of, there's a lot of expressionism. There's obviously a lot of influence from a lot of great political cartoonists that have come before you as well. There's also a lot of things that are not, drawn at all. There's kind of performative elements to your art and to your voice as well. Talk me through a little bit about kind of your process and maybe even some artists that you admire that have kind of helped you to create this really cool, very varied style.
Well, I think firstly for my political cartooning, that initially I really adapt the style like artist Cassie Corwitz, who is a German female expressionist artist. But I think she is majorly being neglected and overlooked by the art history from the West. Of course, because she is a woman, and also she was usually regarded from left-wing internationalism by the time. But what fascinating is her style, this kind of very powerful wood-carved texture, is gradually adapted by the entire left-wing movement internationally, including Soviet Union, and then being introduced to China by a very famous writer whose name is Lu Xun. He was a big fan of Cassie Corwitz, and then he actually published her work in the album and introduced to the entire left-wing movement. Well, the revolution succeeded, and then the Dragon Slayer finally become the dragon himself. This style once was the form of revolution and helping the people from the bottom, helping the people who are powerless, then become actually a propaganda form for the entire Chinese Communist Party in the 50s, 60s, through the whole Cultural Revolution period from 60s to 70s. Yes. And even now, you can still see the trace of a similar style within the North Korea propaganda art. So for me, I initially really fascinated by this history and want to bring this style to its original status, that when this style was used to actually express for the people who are in the bottom of the society, and using that, now seen as a Chinese propaganda way, but use that very same language to challenge its oppression, to challenge its crimes that are against humanity in China. But for my other practice, I would rather try to be more free, because I hate to really kind of lock myself in one style. That I think for each topic, for each subject, there's always a better media or a better way to portray it. And, the imagination is the only limitation here. So for my gallery practice, I tend to use different non-traditional materials or the forms, more into installation and then performance. In my recent show in Warsaw, it is open in the middle of this year. One of the major work is not visual at all. It's actually a sound work. That is an installation with multiple soundtracks that I collected from people who actually live inside of China. But this very clip is echoing with a BBC interview from 1989, the Tiananmen Massacre, when a very young protest was interviewed and asked where he's going, and he answered, "I'm going to Tiananmen Square to protest." And then the journalist asked a very dumb question. He's like, "Why do you go there?" And he's like, "Well, I think this is my duty." And after that, this very short 7-second clip just went viral nowadays in China, to a point that the core sentence that "this is my duty," the very word of duty, will be censored on the 4th of June, which is the Tiananmen Massacre anniversary in China.
A fateful day.
Exactly. Yeah. So the very concept of this work is just collecting people who are willing to repeating what has been said by this young protest from 1989. And everybody's repeating, "I want to go to Tiananmen Square to protest because I think it is my duty." And when all the soundtrack was being installed in a very sealed space, that it bring a visit almost like audibly back to the square and listen to people to chanting from here, from there, and surrounding you. So for me, that is, I don't really need actual visual language to describe it anymore. The sound itself is powerful enough. The different tone, the different direction is my language.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. Even just thinking about what you said now. Wow. That must have been such a crazy time. But do you have any particular memories of that day? I mean, you must have been maybe only, 2 or 3 or 4 on that actual day. Do you remember anything about that day? Sort of, certain days that define us, or perhaps any inherited memories from your parents or anything around that? Like, how is that generally remembered amongst people that day in particular, June the 4th?
Well, the issue about the Tiananmen movement and the massacre later is it's not remembered, or it is always a memory that the Chinese government tried to suppress. I was merely a toddler by the time, so I wouldn't really have my own experience or memory. But what is really a shame is that this memory was also not passed by anyone that I know when I grow up. There is certainly no way to find it on publication or school education or anything, you name it. I only knowing the existence of Tiananmen movement and massacre when I studied in university by a total accident. So what happened is it's almost like a miracle that when I studied in university, that me and my classmates have this ritual to kind of pirating films from internet. That is like in the early 2000, before Netflix and streaming. The only way you can watch, interesting stuff is actually pirating stuff. But of course, in China, you know how much they love to protect copyrights. So no, it was a nightmare. So it was not a very good thing to invading other people's intellectual property, but that was the only way you can actually get interesting material. So anyway, we have this ritual to pirating films, but at that time, you kind of never know where you really downloaded from, like BT or something like that. And we just downloaded. We think it's like a Taiwanese romance or an action film. I can't remember, but it turned out to be not what we expected. It turned out to be a documentary about Tiananmen massacre, and someone just being so smart and sneaky enough to insert this documentary within an entire film. So we started watching. It was like someone kissing, a romantic. Then suddenly, it turned black, and then a title popping out, "The Heavenly Gate," about the Tiananmen massacre, and we just sat there watching, and that is the first time I actually being told in this way about the Tiananmen massacre. It's like a 3-hour long documentary it's very rich in all the visual evidence and the narratives and everything. So there's no way you can deny the existence of the whole entire student movement, but also for me at the moment, it's really, really surreal because that doesn't happen like 20, 30, 50 years ago, like my great-parents' generation, right? It just happened in less than 20 years ago. So in modern China, and this thing, in a national level of movement, entirely erased from any record or individual narratives is just shocking. To me, it might be less shocking because I'm grow up in this family. To me, the more important to listen to this finished the jigsaw puzzle of my understanding of China. Like the same government continues cracking down on ordinary people like they did to my great parents. And the other very, very fascinating or shocking experience for me is, for the movement, the majority of the protests are just students. University student, exactly the age as I watched this documentary. But compare my life by the time with them and endure all the unfairness and oppression from the government without asking a change. But that generation had a life so differently that makes me feel small. And I just don't want that anymore.
So I want to get into the sort of the nuts and bolts of your views, and exactly what your art, through your activism, is really trying to kind of express and get to the heart of. And I think it's important to do this not only to give it another voice, but also because, especially in Western countries, there's always, the story you get, and then there's the real story, and how these perceptions influence what people think happens in that country. I come from, South Africa, where a lot of people have that, the global story, what they think happens, and then there's the internal story, what really happens. And that's hard to know unless you're there, unless it's been part of your lived experience. So specifically with you in China, your upbringing, your exile, if you like, as well, and the art and the work that you continue to do, I'd like to really zoom in on, firstly, like, what is your beef? What is the beef that you have, and how could you describe that in your art, and how you are trying to call some attention to the real things that matter, the specific human rights abuses, the specific abuses of power that are bothering you and that keep you up at night, and that arguably keep millions of other people up at night, but they don't have the voice you do. So maybe thinking about that as the first part. And then secondly, how would you want things to be different? If there was the opportunity to sit down with the subjects of your drawings in some magical fantasy, if there was a possibility to do that and to look them square in the eye and to have a conversation, what would you say? And what would you want them to change or do differently?
Mm.
I know it's a big question, but that's what we do on this podcast.
It is a huge question. Okay, let me address the first part, and maybe you'll have to remind me the second part of the question later. Well, I think everything starts personal. Without being personal, it will end up as hollow chant for love and peace. And I always believe that it is because certain art is so specific. I know that if I pursue this road, that I will be hunted by the Chinese government for what I do or what I want to express. So I choose to be anonymous from the very beginning. For 7 years, I never appear in public place without a mask. I never really do interview in this way without twisted my voice. But in 2018, everything just turned upside down. That the Chinese government find out who I am just 3 days before my first solo exhibition in Hong Kong. Then what happened is my relatives back in Shanghai got taken to the police station, not just one, but several. And all of them actually had no idea what I do. You know, I've kept my life so divided and separate. But nevertheless, the Chinese government find out who I am. The message is very clear. They want to punish me and punish my family back in China for what I do. And the message was, I have to cancel my Hong Kong exhibition. I have to stop making any art that criticizes the Chinese government, or otherwise there will be no mercy to me nor to my family. And this obviously is a huge challenge to me. It's not because I didn't anticipate or expect that this might happen, but still, regardless how much preparation that you do, that at this moment it's still a gut punch.
Yeah,
but
of note.
But I've told myself, you know, it's clearly that nobody in this world can really exchange freedom for safety. And if someone do so, you might just lose everything. You will lose both freedom and safety. So after that, I have to make a decision that firstly, cutting off my connection to China so that my family become less valuable to the police if they want to use them to pressure on me or reach to me, which is an extremely hard decision. It's a very inhuman decision to do, but it is also necessary and the only option that I have. And secondly, I want to continue making art that I believe in. And I want to show the Chinese government that they cannot make me surrender to this threat. And also I want to show to all my readers and audiences that someone got to start up, you know, someone have to continue doing this so that more people join me one day and I'll become less lonely, and we all share the risk together, and that's the only way that you can change this regime. Well, like I mentioned, the show was in Hong Kong, got cancelled. And after the show was cancelled, I actually received a lot of support from the Hong Kong community that my work was posted on the street in Hong Kong right after the cancellation of the show. So even though it was not shown in the venue itself, but my art was spread in the city already. And only 6 months after, the Hong Kong protest in 2019 erupted hugely, and you know, millions of people marched on the streets demanding their freedom, demanding their democracy in the city, regardless of the Chinese authorities' operation, months after months. And that was the moment that I feel like, okay, this is my chance to pay back to the Hong Kong community. So I started drawing almost every day, following the protests, following the reaction and oppression from the police. And the most exciting part is every time I post something online, it's swiftly translated into home community. And the next day when people march on the street, they will hold a print of my art as a part of the protest itself. That was the moment, that was the amazing moment that I can finally say, yes, you can cancel one of my exhibitions, but look, the city now, the entire fucking city is my gallery, and every hand that holding my art is a wall that's saying no to China. It is a voice saying no to the Chinese government's operation. So that is how I feel, this art actually means quite a lot, not just to me personally, but also to the people who in need for support and empowerment.
Yeah.
And those dark humor that are within the art is also giving them a brief moment for joy, for smile. Because in the process, when, I draw a caricature of a character, when I steal their power from their authority, then suddenly the people who are viewing that art feel that there is still hope, and that's something that they should expect in the future. And so basically, that entire movement, even though tragically it was cracking down by the Chinese government, and now Hong Kong is a dying city as a financial center as well as a free city. But those memory lives, and I am very proud that my arts become a part that can help this memory to survive and serve as a seed for the future to grow a difference. Well, the second part of the question is where you ask me what I want to see the change for China or for this regime. I have to say this is a very scary moment for the entire world. Well, what we're facing is more than just the problem of human rights abuse inside of China. It's much more than that. Yes, we see Uyghur community are facing genocide. Millions of Uyghurs, particularly Muslim community, are being put into the concentration camps. Yeah. We see the cracking down on Hong Kong. We see the zero COVID policy that basically slavery every individual back in China. We see the cultural genocide that happened in Tibet and then continuing hurting the Tibetan people. But it's more than that. Now China is aiming at Taiwan, and very likely, unfortunately I would say it very directly, it's actually very likely the China military would invade Taiwan in a very possible future. And the implication of that is actually it will drag the entire world into a new world war.
Yeah. It also seems like it's a time of a lot of great powers which might have amassed their power over the last century, the last 50 years, of which China, US, Europe to a degree as well, they're all kind of in some level of decline, it seems, whether it's politically, socially, economically, or all of those in some kind of weird cocktail. And what happens when great empires are declining? They push even harder in the same direction in order to make sure that they're holding on and that they don't lose grip, right? And so often we've seen, and this happens in history time and time again, look at what happened to the Romans. The more that it started to fall apart, the more harsh and the more brutal things became, because they could perhaps sense the end was near, or that there would be some external force that was making them fall apart, which is ultimately kind of what happened to them, at least. But there was a kind of a denial. They're like, no, we're going to keep going. This is the empire, for all eternity. And look what happened to them. They spectacularly broke apart. Now, that's not to say that will happen tomorrow in any of these major countries, but there's something that happens when there's a decline, but also when there's a rot, something rotten in the middle of that is driving that decline. And often it comes from what seems to be sometimes a moral rot, or something where the general treatment of people at an individual level, persecution, oppression of basic rights, that seems to just take off. And unfortunately, China's had a really bloody and difficult history with that. But at the same time, China's had a beautiful long history of incredible progress, which predates, even mainland Europe by thousands of years, even back to when the Mesopotamians were around. So there's a long history of progress, but also counter progress as well. So do you think that we're just in the next phase of the kind of the up and down cycle, or does it feel like maybe something new might happen over the horizon?
Well, firstly, I do not believe that history always go as linear, that we will always be set on the progress for certain. If we examine the entire human being history, that there are more time of wars and this blood and uncertainty than prosperity and peaceful. What we are having now is quite a precious time that is partially leading by this new idea of society, which is democracy, and also the booming of technology. But in the same time that I don't think people should take it as granted, and I also don't believe what Fukuyama said, that history has ended. History never ended. History always is a circle. And the people within the circle are swimming against the currency. That if we do not defending those very precious new invention of society like democracy, then we will be dragged down to the bottom of the water and restart bloodshed like what we did in the history for thousands and thousands of years. And for China particularly, well, there's a very interesting term. I believe it's called dictator's gamble. Exactly like what you just described, that when they are facing, especially in authoritarian, for dictators, when they're facing extreme internal problems, they tend to not do gradual reform or cure the sickness within the society, but doing something rather like a gamble, to burn everything to see if there's something good for them or beneficial for them would happen. That is exactly what we witnessed from Russia for the Ukraine invasion. If we roll the clock a little bit back to see what's Putin's decision on Ukraine's invasion, Russia's economy has been suffer for declining since the COVID. Yeah. And obviously, in order to stabilize the power for Putin and also fulfill his strongman ambition, it is his gamble, regardless the misassessment of the war situation. He marched on Ukraine, with no doubt. And China and Xi Jinping is very much in the same, echo chamber. That because his personal ambition, we all know that China's economy is no longer the miracle, the unicorn it claimed to be, but showing some declining sign which is beyond repairment, apart from political reform, which is also something a dictator like Xi Jinping would never do. So then the next choice would be a dictator's gamble, and it's only logical that he will leading into war against Taiwan and basically burning the whole aestheticals around the world and hoping in the chaos as a strongman figure like him would thrive again. So that is particularly dangerous and horrifying.
So I before we wrap up, and I want to kind of just briefly get to what's currently happening in terms of the diary for you, any exciting exhibitions or pieces of work that you've got planned in the pipeline. It'd be great to wrap up on that, but just quickly before that, how do you, just generally for you on a day-to-day level, how do you function? Do you have habits or certain rhythms that you do? Do you have certain things that you read? Perhaps you've got a daily practice or something that keeps your spirits up, because it's not easy being in exile. It's not easy, obviously, being away from your family, your friends, your connections, and of course you've started a new life for yourself in Australia, which is remarkable. But at the same time, I'm sure you miss home. and there's parts of it that are always with you. So are there little things that you do to kind of raise your spirits? Do you go for walks? Do you watch old movies? Like how do you kind of just keep yourself in a positive mindset as much as possible?
Art is my curse, and art is also my bless. For the curse part, obviously, it brings me a lot of trouble, and it really destroy a normal sense of life. But in the same time, I receive so much joy in creating art. They're not in the part of selection subject that is always full of tear and blood, but no matter what subject I'm working on, the process of making art is a very pure, relaxing, and almost like, kind of meditation process. It's about lines, it's about tones, it's about aesthetics within the expression. So it's a bit like smoking, right? It's bad for health, but you enjoy the moment when you are inhaling. And in this sense, it can be paint or brush. So I'm really kind of, I don't live a life like weekday or weekend. It's always just working every day. And it will start from surfing on news, whether social media, Twitter, or now the bloody X, or, from news that's seeking inspiration. And then I spend a lot of time talking to the people from China, because that is the way that I can make it work as a, artist online that also want to talk something about reality. Work is something that actually keeps me more healthy. Well, but this is a very stressful form of life because
Sure.
To be honest, I don't even feel safe in Australia or anywhere if I exhibit. For example, in Italy, in Warsaw, in Prague, that there are, threat happening from the Chinese embassy, things like that. In Australia, I got followed by agents. But there's one thing that I particularly think it's suiting for me, which might sound a bit weird, but I'm a huge fan for all the horror stuff, horror films, horror novels. People are joking around saying, wow, your life itself is like a horror story. Why do you want to dive into another one? Well, my answer is I'm worrying about things that is connecting to me. But when I'm consuming, let's say, a classic horror film, then I'm getting nervous and sweaty and worrying about character and then project myself into this character.
Totally, yeah.
But what I get as a rest is it's not me. It's not real me. It's not real my trouble. And for let's say 90 minutes, I don't need to worry about being Badiucao and being hunted by the Chinese agents in Melbourne. Yeah. But I'm worrying become a Jack who's running from a human skin monster or something like that. That is, I think it's really a good way for escapism. It's some kind
sense.
of weird relaxation process that I've taken. But also I always admire the imagination within those supernatural genre. It does open my eyes. And in another way, it's always using a supernatural or exaggerated threat or monster as analogy for the problem in the reality. So that is something that I always feel particularly interested. So, people always ask me, hey, Badiucao, if you do not do political works, what kind of works are you going to do? I've been thinking a lot of doing some kind of a theory of horror things or creating a theory of the monsters, which is not necessarily directly connecting with, the political problem, but it can appear as a metaphor,
Just lastly, before we wrap up a really, really interesting and heartfelt conversation, where can we sort of, continue to send more attention your way? How can we follow up on what you're doing, your latest pieces of work, your art, some events that might be coming up? How do we blow this up wide? Where is it just about heading to your website, to your Instagram page?
To be honest, I don't know where I would have my next exhibition yet because it's always a problem. Things in Australia, I wouldn't think I would have any exhibition because self-censorship within the industry was extremely terrible. That due to the threat from the Chinese government or the influence from the Chinese government. And in Europe, every time my show is threatened by the Chinese embassy, so it definitely raised the bar for any institution or museum who would want to represent my work or showing my work, that they have to take this into consideration every time. So it does book away a lot of opportunities. So for the exhibition side, I'm sorry, I don't know what's the news, and I hope I can share very soon. But for regular works, particularly for my political cartoons, that social media is always a, relatively reliable platform for updating. And also I draw for newspaper in Australia, for the Ages in Sydney Morning Herald. And that's providing me a very precious opportunity to talk into the audience in Australia. But no matter whatever cartoon that I created, you can always see it on my social media. The other big project that I'm working on 24/7 every day is I'm working on a graphic novel, which is a genre that I've never touched before. So it is indeed a challenge. And it will be a very kind of dark but fascinating story about resistance and wars in the future. And hopefully sooner it will be published next year in American and English. So that is something that I really look forward and work hard on.
Fantastic. We'll definitely look out for that. And hopefully have you on another chat with us on the Art for Human Rights podcast. You can always depend on us and our organization for the fullest support and the exposure to not only your amazing art, but to your mission and what you're doing, and to be a voice for your conviction as well, which is really inspiring and very brave. And I think as from one young person to another, I see that in you, and I appreciate that. And you're awesome.
Thank you. It's a great honor.
Thanks, man. Thank you so much for your time. We'll have you on again soon. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Art for Human Rights podcast. I'd like to close off with a poem by the German poet Rilke. I live my life in growing orbits, which move out over the things of the world. Perhaps I can never achieve the last, but that will be my attempt. I'm circling around God, around the ancient tower, and I've been circling for 1,000 years. And I still don't know if I'm a falcon, or a storm, or a great song.